Hello and welcome to Then and Now, a conversation with Hosea, day number 23 of 26. My name is Derek Hoven. I'm the pastor at Salem Lutheran Church in Orlando, Florida, and we have been reading and have a few more days yet to read through the entire book of Hosea, reflect a little bit on what it might have spoken to in Hosea's time, and then to let the prophet put some questions before us in our present day. Yesterday, we read the first 6 verses of chapter 12 and saw in those a remembrance of the story of Jacob, a reminder that God will continue to hold up God's part of covenant, but also expecting the people to live into some new ways of living as well. Today, we finish up chapter 12. A trader in whose hands are false balances, he loves to oppress. Ephraim has said, I am rich. I have gained wealth for myself. In all of my gain, no offense has been found in me that would be sin. I am the Lord your God from the land of Egypt. I will make you live in tents again, as in the days of the appointed festival. I spoke to the prophets. It was I who multiplied visions, and through the prophets I will bring destruction. In Gilead there is iniquity, they shall surely come to nothing. In Gilgal they sacrifice bulls, so their altars shall be like stone heaps on the furrows of the field. Jacob fled to the land of Aram. There Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he guarded sheep. By a prophet the Lord brought Israel up from Egypt, and by a prophet he was guarded. Ephraim has given bitter offense, so his Lord will bring his crimes down on him and pay him back for insults. There's a couple of interesting different things happening in this chapter. First, all through this book of Hosea, there's been metaphorical language and certainly speaking to the unfaithfulness of the people in their worship of God. But we've also tried to keep in front of us that there are real people and circumstances that are impacted by the leadership of the failed monarchy, by the priests that have led people astray. And in right here in verse 7, we hear that there are actual economic injustices that are happening. A trader whose hands are in false balances, right? The balances that they would use to measure out things in the marketplace, right? False balances mean unjust economics. And then there's this whole sense that God, in verse 9, says, like, I'm the one that led you out of Egypt, right? But Ephraim in verse 8 has said, I am rich. I have gained wealth for myself. In all of my gain, no offense has been found in me. So there's this sense that God has given the people this land, and the people have now believed that it is their wealth and their gain and their activity that has brought them to some place of prosperity. But as we've just heard, right, there's false balances. So the people believe that their economics are faithful, and yet, as the prophet is speaking the word of the Lord, they are not faithful. There are things that are happening, corrupt injustices in the economics that are taking place. And after this recognition of unjust economics, then there's this movement into sort of a reflection on the role of the prophets. I spoke to the prophets. It was I who multiplied visions. And it sort of steps through a little bit of that role. And then says it was by a prophet that the Lord brought Israel up from Egypt, and by a prophet he was guarded. The prophets were not future, like soothsayer kind of people. They were people who spoke the word of the Lord, often a word that would be critical of the people's relationship, the way they were living into the covenantal promises of God, but also the prophet spoke to a different and hoped-for future. And that's what we've seen all the way through this book of Hosea. There's a critical word where the people have gone astray, but a hopeful word that says God's promises will continue to come to the people. The verse 14, though, doesn't land in the hopeful place. The chapter ends with Ephraim having given bitter offense, and the Lord will bring his crimes down on him and pay him back for his insults. It makes it sound like the Lord, that God is being somehow vindictive, but we also know that unjust economics are not sustainable, right? They're not sustainable for the whole of the people. And as with the other bits of reality that have snuck in throughout this book, whether it's the use of women's bodies, the war that they are engaged in, the chaos amongst the leadership, all of these things have consequences apart from God particularly heaping them on the people. It's the people's behavior that is leading them to places that are ending up to be uncomfortable, where the monarchy is failing and their religion is coming up empty, and some of these other consequences of their actions. So if that's the case, right, if we've got these unjust economics and this role of the prophets, for us today, then we might wonder what the prophet would speak about our economics. In particular, if we assume, as is the case in this book, that we may think our economics and our capitalism are without sin, the prophet would say, well, no, there are unjust balances. And so the question that can be put before us is an opportunity for us to examine, where are our economics unjust? What economic practices and failures land on some people more heavily than others? And how is that relationship between economics and faith something that we could wrestle with more deeply? As I have said most days, these are not easy questions to answer, especially when you turn a critical eye to capitalism in our culture that gets people to tense up and say, no, capitalism is the best thing ever. And the prophet is inviting us to say, it's an economic system, and let's take a step back and try to have an honest look at the ways that our capitalism can have deeply hurtful and negative impacts on people, and what role we might play in that. That's it here for day 23. We will be back tomorrow to pick up with chapter 13. Thanks for being with me.